Joining us now is Donita Judge. She's lead attorney in Ohio for the Advancement Project, which supports voting rights. I should tell you, there's just so much news out of Ohio lately that Donita Judge was the lead attorney on another case decided in Ohio this week that says the state can no longer throw out your ballot if you accidentally vote in the wrong precinct. Ms. Judge, thank you for being here. It's nice to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
You are involved in the intricacies of a lot of these matters. Let me ask you if I explained anything wrong about what's been happening in Ohio. Did that seem roughly correct?
Well, almost correct.
Okay.
In Ohio, in terms of the provisional ballots that are cast in the wrong precinct due to poll worker error.
Okay.
And that's a huge distinction there. There were approximately 14,000 of those ballots that were thrown out in 2008. And so now the court has basically said that when a voter has done everything that they possibly can, they've taken their personal responsibility, as Secretary Houston often says. They've registered to vote, they've showed up at the correct polling place, and then they've been directed to the wrong precinct through no fault of their own. You can no longer throw out those ballots.
That had previously been the way that Ohio was operating, that even if it was no fault of your own, they told you to vote in the wrong place, that would result in your ballot being thrown out. But because of the case that you won this week, that will now be counted as a provisional ballot. That will now be counted as a proper ballot. How will that be counted?
Well, it actually was a provisional ballot, basically. If a provisional ballot cast in the wrong precinct now will not be thrown out if in fact it is poll worker error.
Okay.
Ohio law is very clear. The poll workers have the responsibility to direct voters to the correct polling place. They also have the responsibility to make sure that their provisional ballot application is completed correctly. And that's another provision of the lawsuit that was just passed, that provisional ballots now that do not have the signature in the right place or do not have their signature or maybe left their name off, but you can still determine who the voter is, then you can no longer throw out those ballots. And that was a huge, huge win for Ohio voters and Ohio citizens, because Ohio tends to cast more provisional ballots than any state in the country other than California, something like 200,000 provisional ballots in 2008.
Wow. In terms of this ruling today from a federal district court judge, there has been a hugely politicized fight over early voting in Ohio. We've been sort of tracking the twists and turns of it, including some seemingly very partisan terms in Ohio. If early voting has been restored in Ohio by this ruling, how much risk is that ruling at? Is there enough time between now and the election that an appeal could happen or some other legal matter could happen that would actually stop this from going into effect?
Well, I think there is a good risk. As a matter of fact, as I was sitting here this evening, Attorney General DeWine has just announced that they will appeal this decision to the Sixth Circuit.
Okay.
And so there is a huge possibility that, that we will be in court again fighting this battle. But again, we will urge the courts to really uphold the decision of the lower court that really protects the fundamental right to vote in Ohio and gives the Ohio voters an opportunity to vote in that last weekend where so many voters really came out and cast ballots, and disproportionately African Americans were among those voters who voted that last weekend. And that's a crucial weekend prior to an election to decide that you do not want to have early voting, and especially when you've had it previously.
Yeah. That's the part of it that I don't understand. It's not like there's ever been any problem with the early voting before, right?
Right. Well, no, there was no problem. But, of course, we had an opportunity to see in 2008 who came out to vote.
So that was the problem.
That was the problem. Right. That was the problem.
Defined in partisan terms. I mean, here's the issue about reporting on voting rights. So the voting rights stuff is so blatantly partisan when you step back from it and you realize it's all Republican states doing this, all in ways that tend to disenfranchise typically Democratic voters. But the arguments from the Republicans are always about this threat of voter fraud. And as much as you debunk the idea that voter fraud is a major specter in our country, looming over our elections in a way that really is affecting the outcomes, if they can find one case somewhere, one very hairy-sounding allegation somewhere, they can sort of distract the argument, right, with those claims. On early voting, that has nothing to do with even a red herring called voter fraud, right? Is there any practical argument against early voting that makes any sense from the other side that's not just about keeping Democrats away from the polls? No,
there's no practical argument. And basically what these laws are throughout the country are really the right-wing politicians manipulating the voting laws because they actually know who's voting. And so basically they have no real argument other than to throw up the red herring voter fraud. And voter fraud may exist if in fact you are manipulating politicians who are manipulating elections, then there may be some issues and some concerns there. But ultimately, elections have to be free, fair, and accessible. And basically, that is what these decisions basically said this week, is that the courts are going to uphold our democracy, and they're going to uphold our fundamental right to vote in this country.
Yeah, and seeing it in Texas, seeing it pending in South Carolina, seeing it in Florida, seeing it in Ohio, and again, all of these things are appealed, all of these things are still in process to a certain extent, seeing democratic rights, and the most fundamental of all of our democratic rights, supported this way by the courts. It is getting a little close to the election to have this stuff still up in the air, but it is still heartening to see this rigorous defense of our rights. You're part of that. Donita Judge, thank you for being here. Donita Judge, lead attorney for the Advancement Project in Ohio. Thank you for your work, and thanks for helping us understand it.
Thank you very much for having me.